All right, Hashim. Thank you.
And it's
All right. Once again, thank you everyone for showing up and taking time to join this workshop on Discover Research Writing, where I'll be talking about the reader-centered approach to scientific writing. So a little bit about myself. So I'm an assistant professor currently at King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals since 2017. So my main job is conducting research and teaching in the Department of Geosciences. But before coming to KPPM, I was a postdoc at Princeton University, where I also worked for the Princeton writing program as a writing in science and engineering fellow, and which is where I learned how to teach writing and interacted with a lot of wonderful people at the Princeton writing program. And I'm going to today share a lot of what I have learned by interacting at the Princeton writing program. And since then, I've been teaching these courses at different venues. So, but this is just a 1-hour workshop. And therefore it will be, let's say, at a high level instead of those classes or courses, which are typically 15 to 18 hours and held during a week or so. All right, so the motivation for these courses are actually twofold. So one of the things that we need to understand is, and a lot of young writers do not really appreciate is this idea of reader-centered writing. And what does it mean? So this is what we are going to unfold today. And the second thing is a vocabulary to discuss writing. Why do we really need a vocabulary to discuss writing? So these are the two key things today's talk will be centered around. All right, the first thing, reader-centered writing. So let's go back and think about the time when we first started writing in English, or let's say our first assignment to write an essay in English. Maybe during our high school or middle school, right? Our teacher asked us to write an essay on probably a famous personality of our country, or some historic event, let's say. What would you do? You would probably go online and look up the information, try to put together all the information on a piece of paper, hoping that your teacher would give you an A or an A plus, right? So essentially what you were doing at that time was you were trying to understand what you as a writer should do to get an A or an A plus, right? So instead of thinking about your reader, because your reader actually knew a lot more on the topic than you just wanted to demonstrate to your reader that you know at least 20% or 30% of what your teacher knew, and hoping that that you would get the best grade possible, right? And also at the same time, you're also thinking what I should not do to avoid bad grades, right? So you were constantly thinking about yourself, or the responsibility was on your shoulders, right? And you were continuously thinking about yourself, and hopefully you were trying to do that. Hopefully you could put together your article in a way that your teacher would make sense. And because your teacher was an expert on the topic, more often than not, your article would make sense if you have done enough work. So the task that you were doing at that time is what we call demonstration, right? So you were trying to demonstrate to your teacher that you know some percentage of what they knew about the topic, right? Now all of you guys are graduate students. That task of demonstration is no longer valid, because our readers actually know very little, almost nothing about our work, right? So, but that thinking about that teacher or that red pen in the sky, we're still in that mode of writing, that we are still thinking that we are trying to demonstrate about our work to somebody, right? We haven't moved on in our head that we're no more doing demonstration. Rather, our task now is to inform our readers, and our readers know very little, almost nothing about our topic, right? So that's one thing, one mistake that young writers do, is that they do not understand who their audience is, and what what's the background of their audience, and what they should be doing. So all the focus in professional writing should be on the reader. The questions you should be asking when working on your drafts or working on your paper is, for example, what is the background of my readers? What are the things I need to supply to my readers to make sure they understand my science? They haven't gone through the same journey that you have, right? in your labs or in your computational work. So you need to make sure you provide all the information in a way that they are informed to take further actions, right? So why do we want to write papers in science is because we want to show to people that what we do is worth reading and worth taking some actions upon, right? Because we don't want to do research just to publish. We want people to read and make use of our work. And that's how science grows, right? And that's also, as scientists, later on, you will see that people will keep asking questions like, how many citations is that journal had? Because people try to gauge the impact of your work through these measures. And if you're not doing a good job in convincing your reader that that the value, that there is some value in your research, they won't be able to use that work, or they won't be interested in doing that, right? So the first thing is letting them understand what you have done. And the second thing is that helping them use that work later on as well. So which we will talk about in a while. So that's the first motivation, reader-centered writing. The second thing is about a vocabulary to discuss writing. And this is very important. Because let's fast forward from our middle school days to our graduate school days. Okay, so you are a first-year graduate student, and you are in your lab working on some experiments which you're very excited about. And let's say 6 months or 1 year into your research, you find some results which you're very excited about. And in that excitement, you go to the office of your advisor, hoping to get a pat on the back, and you show to your advisor, look, I've got some exciting results, and they are pretty novel and blah blah. And you expect that your advisor will praise your efforts, right? And instead, what happens is your advisor says, "Oh, okay, I think you're ready to write your first paper. And by the way, you know how to write a paper, don't you?" Right? That's what most advisors do, right? And you are standing there in front of your advisor, and you're thinking that, well, all of the people in my lab or in my group seems to know how to write papers, and they've written their papers by themselves. But somehow I don't know about writing. I don't know how to write papers. But I guess I should say yes, because it would be very awkward to say no, right? And somehow you'd say yes, and then you go back to your desk and you start thinking about how should I write papers, and you start to put together a draft, seeking help online or somewhere else. And then you take this draft to your advisor, right? And essentially what happens is that your advisor takes a look at your draft, and if your advisor is a mean person, he or she would say, okay, this is garbage. This is not how you write paper. Go and rewrite it again, right? However, if your advisor is a nice person, your advisor would say, okay, give it to me and I'll work on it. I'll edit it and I'll give it back to you. And most often what happens is advisors would give you the edited version and tell you, okay, see, this is how a paper is written. There were many things I had to change. And you're like, if I knew how to take my version and bring it to your version, I would have done it myself, right? So there's always a gap between what knowledge our advisors have about writing and us, right? And many times I see my students, they complain to me exactly about the same thing, that they don't know how their advisors could take their version or their draft and make it look beautiful. And this is essentially what you need to learn as a writer, right? So that in the future, you should be able to write better from the get-go. And the reason why this happens is because I say there is no mechanism to transfer the information that our advisors have about writing to the students or the junior scientists. And this happens because they themselves have learned about writing through this iterative process, that is through this editing mode. So you hand in your paper to your advisor, they edit it, and you see what are the changes, you try to make sense. And hopefully, if you do it enough times, you will learn about writing, and they would have most likely learned about writing this way, and they may be very good writers. But this thing about transferring knowledge to young scientists, it does not happen always. And there are a few exceptions. I know I've been working with some people at Princeton University, and they tell me that and also at KAUST, I've done work with a number of students that tell me how much importance their advisors pay to writing, and they try to give enough information to their students and tell them how to change their drafts. But that does not happen. That's not the norm. So essentially what we need is a vocabulary to discuss writing, because this way of learning through editing and iteration is a very slow way of learning about writing. So that's very important, which is to learn about vocabulary, because once we know a vocabulary to discuss writing, we can take a couple of papers and maybe, if I give you 2 papers, you can say, okay, this paper 1 is very well written because everything reads well and I enjoy reading and I can understand everything. And this paper 2 is so badly written, I have to go back many times to understand what's being said, and I have to spend so much effort to understand. If I give you 2 papers, you can say that, right? You can feel one paper is well written, the other is poorly written, but it's very hard to say why that is the case, right? So vocabulary tells us why, if this is a good paper, why is it a good paper? If this is a bad paper, why is it a bad paper? And how can we make it better, right? What are the things? So today we will see a few of those examples as well. One thing that you can do, not right now, but later, is to Google Princeton Writing Program, Writing Lexicon, and you will find a document which you can read. So these are different terms that describe different parts of your paper, okay? And what it will do is, what we do in our classes is that we try to read papers through this lexicon. So I encourage you guys to read the lexicon terms later on, and when you're reading papers, think about these terms and see if you find a good paper, how is the author using these lexicon terms and what's the interplay between the different terms. And once you have a deep understanding of writing lexicon, this helps, this goes a long way in really understanding drafts of your colleagues or yourself and improving your writing, because it tells you, what is missing. It gives you that vocabulary, right? You're no more relying on those feelings. You can specifically mention that, okay, the motivation is weak in this paper, or the motivation is not there, for example, and so forth. So I'm just saying a few terms right now. Okay, so let's move on and let's talk about the writing process. So some of you may have already watched the video that's there on YouTube about the writing process, but let me go over it one more time. So people who were studying English composition until the mid-1970s, they mostly looked at a product. And of course, we all have this belief that writing is a gift and some of us can write better than others. And therefore, people who were trying to study English composition, they were also trying to understand how good writing can be done. But at that time, they were looking at the product. And then they moved on from the product to the process. And they said, okay, the product does not tell us enough how to write well. But there is actually a process that good writers adopt. So they found common themes between good writers, that they were following the same process. And what was that process? So they found that they could divide the entire writing, let's say, task into four sub-stages, okay? And the first one they call pre-drafting. So this is where your everything that goes before drafting a paper. So you're thinking about your writing, you're thinking about an outline for your paper, or you're conducting research, or you're generating results. So even when you are, let's say, doing experiments, you're thinking about how am I going to present those things. So that's everything before you start drafting your paper, right? So everything, even I would say, you preparing yourself to get into the mode of writing. That's also what you could consider pre-drafting. So getting everything there to help you draft, right? The next stage is called drafting. That is the act of writing papers, right? So this is what you have in mind, everything there, and you're now trying to put it on a piece of paper or on the screen in front of you. And this is sometimes called writing to understand. This is also one thing I would like to focus here, that young writers do not understand, that when you're drafting, it is for your own understanding. Many times what happens is you're writing things, or you're writing about your results, and you gain even better understanding, or you find some new connections, you analyze your data or your results better. So actually drafting is not for somebody else, it's writing for yourself. The next stage is revising or revision, which is what we call writing to be understood. So you have a draft, which only you could understand, If you give it to somebody, they would be scratching, their head, what's going on. And most of the times, and it was true for me as well, when I was writing my first paper, as soon as I was done with the draft, I thought, this is so beautiful, everything is understandable, let me go and submit this. And then, it went to reviewers and there were so many complaints and I was like taken aback. And I didn't realize this, right? It took me a while to realize that what is understandable to me is actually not understandable to everybody, right? So I have to then change or let's say move my draft, in this revision stage and go through something called, the process of writing to be understood. That is, even though everything makes sense to me in my draft, what should I do? And this is the time where we ask these questions, will my readers know this thesis, or do they need some background? Should I talk about paper A or paper B, and should I explicitly mention about the connection? Because a lot of the connections about different papers, it's in our head, but sometimes we do not mention it. But asking these questions really help you think from the perspective of your reader. And in the beginning, it's hard really to wear this hat of a reader. So because you have association with your paper, and oftentimes people complain to me that in the drafting stage, they spent, let's say, a whole day writing a paragraph, and it's so beautiful, and their advisor is saying, just throw away this paragraph, it doesn't make sense. And they have this emotional connection to this paragraph because they spent so much effort and a day writing this paragraph. It's so beautiful. How can I throw this? It doesn't, if it doesn't matter to your reader, it doesn't belong to your paper, right? And those are the things of you should ask yourself. And that's what we go through in those courses in detail and try to teach exactly what it means to revise your paper. Because as young writers, revision is something that is not very obvious. And you may be asking yourself, okay, I understand revision is important, but what should I be doing? So I'll give you guys a couple of examples today of revision process. Oops. And the last part is editing. Now, most of you guys, I guess all of you guys, are non-native English speakers like myself. Sometimes what happens is when we start writing, we cannot let the ideas flow because we are thinking all the time about perfect grammar, thinking about proper English and so on and so forth. But what it does is it sometimes ends up, let's say, blocking our creative process. So what we recommend is, when you're in the drafting stage, don't worry about those things. Just spit what you have in your head, and it can be messy. And sometimes you have to learn to be comfortable with a messy draft. It would look odd. It would look like it has a lot of problems. But don't worry, nobody is going to see it. It's for your own understanding. Then you go through this revision stage and you update things, and then you go through fixing these, let's say, grammatical errors or those issues. And the reason is, if you spend so much time revising something or fixing the grammar before the revision stage, and at the revision stage you realize, oh, it doesn't make sense, this sentence or this paragraph or this whole entire page, I'm not going to use in my paper, then you end up wasting a lot of time in doing it. So this ideally should be done at the last stage. And what will happen over time is that, of course, all good authors, what they do is they spend as much effort in the revision stage as they do in drafting. So if you have written papers in the past, you can judge yourself how much time you have spent revising the paper, right? It takes enormous amount of effort. And in most cases, it is, let's say, pressure through your advisor that you have to go through revision multiple times. But if it is not the case, then there is a tendency to not spend enough time in the revision stage. But all good authors, they spend a lot of time because they want to make sure when the readers have this paper, it makes sense, they're able to understand, and not only understand, they're able to probably reproduce the science and be able to do something else, hopefully citing their work and using it to advance science. One more quick thing. So this is just a paragraph I took from this article, which I highly encourage you guys to take a look at after this session, which is called My Rules of Thumb, in which Gregory Mankiw, who's an economist at Harvard, talks about his rules of thumb to succeed as a researcher, right? And in that, he has a section on writing. And within that section, there's a paragraph where he says, writing well is hard work. So if you thought that you were coming to this 1 hour session and all of a sudden writing would become easy, even to prolific writers like Gregory Mankiw, who has, I don't know, half a dozen books written already and numerous research papers, writing is hard work. It requires that you revise, revise, and revise. Then when you think you're done, you should revise again. So this just emphasizing the importance of revision. Good writing is fun to read, but it's often not fun to do. So when you're reading papers and you come across a paper that is enjoyable, probably it was not enjoyable for the author. Of course, in the beginning, I see that young writers, they tend to struggle with this. The first couple of papers is always a struggle. But gradually, as you move on and understand the revision stage, what happens is your revision and drafting stages kind of merge together. And even when you're drafting, you think about the revision, and that informs your decision while drafting. It becomes seamless, that revision stage, okay? But in the beginning, I would encourage you guys to forget about revision. Just go ahead and write what you have in mind, and then think about the revision stage. And it's going to be a struggle in the first couple of papers, but it will not be an eternal struggle. I once asked John Kenneth Galbraith the secret to his success as a popular writer. So he's talking about his mentor at Harvard, another economist. He said that he revises everything many times. Around the fifth draft, he manages to work in the touch of spontaneity that everyone lacks. So 5 revisions. And this is a prolific writer, a very accomplished writer as well. But revision is something we can never, let's say, overlook. As a young writer, of course, this is something you should pay strong attention to. Now you may be asking, what should I be doing in a revision? I don't know anything about revision. So let's talk about a few examples, okay? So I would rely on you guys. Let me see, participants here. So I would like to have some feedback from you guys. So one thing you could do is either you could give your feedback through this, this feedback mechanism, where you can do yes or no, or you could, I don't know, unmute yourself and say yes or no, or thumbs up or thumbs down, something like that. So this is a story about Fred and his dog. The story is about Fred beating his dog. So Fred has a bad habit of dog beating. Now you may be a dog lover and you wouldn't approve of Fred doing that. But I want you guys to judge what the author is trying to convey about Fred, okay? So if you think the author is trying to convey that Fred is a good person, then you would say thumbs up or yes, or you would click on yes or through this feedback mechanism here on Zoom. Or if you think the author is trying to convey that Fred is a bad person, then say no or thumbs down, okay? So let's go ahead, and I would rely on your participation to make this more fun. All right, so let's read the sentence number 1. What do you guys think the author is trying to convey about Fred? Whether Fred is a nice guy or a bad guy, positive or negative? What do you feel? Okay, Isa is negative. Izzat is negative. Okay, Almir is positive. Tawfiq is, Hashim is negative. Almir, do you like beating dogs? Probably that explains.
No, but based that he's a nice guy, okay. But he has one problem only.
Very interesting, very interesting. Thank you, Almir. And anyone else who thinks Fred is this sentence is about positive about Fred? Anyone else who thinks this is positive or all negative? Abdullah, I didn't see your answer. You are positive, Abdullah. Excellent.
Yeah, I was looking where to do these thumbs up and thumbs down.
Okay. You guys found thumbs up and thumbs down, which is great.
I don't know. I don't know how people were reacting or something. So it's like
great. So there is somebody called user. So Abdullah, I think, yeah, thumbs down and thumbs up just go away, but this yes or no stays. So I would encourage you guys to use yes or no so that stays and I can quickly see. All right. So most of you guys, yeah. Do you want to say anything else, Abdullah?
Yeah. Where can we do this yes or no? I don't know.
Anyone could help, Abdullah?
Fred is reactions button.
Reactions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I see.
Great.
This is
Great.
yes. All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
So mostly you guys are saying negative about Fred, but there are a few people who are positive about Fred. Okay, so most of you guys are negative here. Let's go on. Let's keep this going. Second sentence, although Fred beats his dog, he's a nice guy. So I'm trying to understand what the author is trying to convey through this sentence. Positive Fred, thumbs up. Negative Fred, thumbs down. Okay, Cassandra is positive, Almir is positive, Isa is positive, Bakar is positive. Almost everybody is positive. Okay, excellent. Almost everybody is positive about Fred now. So this is interesting, right? Same, let's say, information, switching places can change your perception, right? Let's go on. Fred is a nice guy, but he beats his dog. Please remove previous reaction so that it does not interfere with our interpretation of this one. Fred is a nice guy, but he beats his dog. Izzat is negative. User is positive. I don't know your name, user. Isa and Wakar are negative. Okay, Abdullah is positive. Sandra is negative. Almir is negative, positive, negative. Mix, right? It's a mix of positive and negative. So let me see, Cassandra, did it take you longer than the previous two sentences to decide whether it should be positive or negative?
Yes, it did take longer because of how they had that but there, but then I gravitated to negative.
Excellent, excellent. Great. That's all valuable feedback, and thank you. We'll keep going, and then I'll sum up everything, what we are supposed to observe. Okay, last sentence. Fred beats his dog, but he's a nice guy. Okay, so Isa, you are using two different ways of signaling. Oh, okay, most of you guys are positive.
Yes.
Okay, Isa is negative. Oh,
no, I'm positive.
You're positive. Positive and then some negative. Okay, very interesting, right? So all the four sentences have same amount of information, but for sentence number one, most of you guys were negative. For sentence number two, most of you guys were positive. For sentence number three, most of you guys were negative. It took more time. For sentence number four, probably took more time, but you guys were positive. Now, something very interesting here is that every sentence is constructed, let's say, differently, but the amount of information is the same. So this is about signaling emphasis to your readers through sentences. Okay, so there are a few cues that authors use to signal emphasis to readers. And if we don't know about those cues, we might end up signaling the wrong thing. We might want to convey to our readers that we are positive about a situation, whereas by constructing the sentence in a different way, we might signal otherwise. And then the reader would go on and read the rest of the paper, and they would feel that there is some strange thing going on. Sometimes you're negative, sometimes you're positive, and I don't know what to do. And I'm sure this kind of thing would have happened to you when you're reading papers, that you're confused about this, and it may happen due to a wrong indication of where to put emphasis. All right, so when writing sentences, writers can signal emphasis through main clause. So the information that you place in a main clause, so main clause is something that it stands on its own, and then there is a subordinate clause that kind of adds onto it. So main clause is like, Fred is a nice guy, or something like that. But when you have an although something, so although is in addition to it, or a subordinate clause. Okay, so readers pay more attention to what is in the main clause. End placement, readers pay more attention to what comes at the end of a sentence. Okay, this is very interesting. Readers pay more attention if you have multiple clauses, let's say subordinate clause and a main clause, then readers will pay more attention to the clause or the part of your sentence which has more length, which is longer. So they would see length as an indication of importance or emphasis. Repetition, if you repeat some information, if you say something and then again, or something like that, it is seen as a signal of emphasis. And semantics, which means you start a sentence by saying, it is worth noting, or it is very important to note, or something like that. Okay, so these are the things which readers pay attention to when they are trying to emphasize in a sentence. And all of this happens subconsciously. We don't really do this consciously that, okay, this is in the main clause, I'm going to pay more attention, or this is at the end, I'm going to pay more attention. This is how English reading goes, right? How we read in English. So let me go back and give you guys some examples of what happened in the previous sentences. So here in sentence number 1, the main clause is he beats his dog, okay? And the end placement says beats his dog, which means main clause says negative about Fred, end placement says negative about Fred, helping you guys make faster decision that beating dog is a bad thing or Fred is not a nice person, and most of you guys were negative. Some of you guys were positive about sentence number 1, and this is very important to note. I know through my experience of working with people whose native language is Russian, somehow in Russian, you start with the most important information first, and then let's say the rest of the details. And this is very interesting because in this sense, it is opposite to English. Where in English, people pay more attention to what's at the end. Therefore, it's always a struggle with probably people who write or whose native language is Russian. They have a struggle in adapting to this thing in English, where readers are actually in English pay more attention to what comes at the end. Okay, so Almir, does that explain well about why you thought sentence number 1 is positive?
Yes, thanks. I got. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, sentence number 2, very quickly. Nice guy, end placement, nice guy, main clause, you guys were positive. Here, the main clause is actually Fred is a nice guy. And then the end placement says beats his dog, which is why Cassandra said, it took me more time to decide. And when this kind of, let's say, thing happens, some readers will go towards main clause, but most people would go towards end placement. And that's why probably most of you still thought this is negative, but it takes a bit of time, right? So if you want to confuse your readers, you might use this kind of thing where you could, have this kind of, let's say, tug of war between end placement and main clause going. But of course, it may depend on how you want to emphasize. Maybe there's something you're not so confident about, so you could use these kind of tricks really to play with the interpretation of your reading, that you don't want to convey, that this thing I believe very strongly. And so you could use this kind of structure where you could put something in the main clause, another thing at the end placement, but you risk the chance that some people will go with what's in the main clause and some others will go with what's at the end. Okay, let's keep going. And again, I'll ask you guys to tell me what you guys think about Fred now in sentence number 5. What you guys think the author is trying to say. Positive Fred, negative Fred. Okay, Xiaolong is positive. Salem is positive. Sandra is positive. Izzat is positive. Almost everybody is positive except Waqar. Waqar, you're negative? And why are you negative? Why do you think it's negative?
I still feel he beats his dog, so it just stays in my head.
Okay, good. So yeah, there may be, you might have your own perception about it that may affect it, but to majority of the readers, it is positive and overwhelmingly positive because if you see, we have main clause, Fred is a nice guy. End placement, Fred is a nice guy. Length, Fred is a nice guy. So we have not only added nice, this thing about Fred being nice as at the end and the main clause, but also we've added length to this part, right? By the time you finish the sentence, some of you may have forgotten that Fred was beating his dog, except Waqar. But it's very good to know that you may have certain way of thinking about a piece of text, but your readers or a majority of your readers may perceive it differently. Therefore, it's very important, whatever you write, you share with your friends and colleagues and try to get their feedback. That's how we learn about writing. And that's how you could learn about writing a lot. So always try to get feedback from others. Okay, this one. Fred is a good husband, a caring father, a fine colleague, and altogether a nice guy, even though he beats his dog. Positive Fred, negative Fred. Negative, Izzat is negative. Salem, negative. Cassandra, positive. Almir, negative. It's a mixed bag. Mostly positive though. Yeah, so you see, again, now you can analyze this yourself. Main clause, good guy. Length, good guy. End placement, beats his dog. So here you are running this risk, right? Where some people focus on the end placement so much in their reading that they would still, no matter how long, you know, your narration about Fred is a good person, was, or it being in the main clause, they would still pay attention to it. So these kind of things, as writers, we should analyze and pay attention to when we are revising our text, that we are not signaling something which is not what we believe, right? So this was an example I gave you guys at the sentence level. We work, of course, at the paragraph level and at this at the entire document level. There are different, of course, levels, and they have their own requirements. But this was just to give you a flavor of things you could do in this reader-centered approach to writing, where you think about how readers go about reading text and you adapt yourself, or you inform your revision process based on that. And the message I want you guys to learn from all of this is that meaning is conveyed only partly by word choice and mostly by the structural location of the word. So where your words are located will make a lot of difference to your readers. So no matter how beautiful your sentences are, no matter how rich your vocabulary is, I know some of the non-native speakers, they complain that I don't have a big vocabulary. I'm really worried about my writing. It should not stop you from being a good writer, right? Of course, that helps in you being expressive with your writing, but that's really not the main focus where you should pay attention to. You should pay attention to learning about how readers go about reading texts and how you can inform your revision process, how you can structure your sentences or your paragraphs or entire document that way. Okay, so let me ask you guys, and this is another example of revising at the sentence level. Let me ask you guys, what do you think is wrong with these two sentences? When you read these two sentences, how do you feel about these two sentences? Feel free to unmute yourself and say what you feel. I will not be able to read chat. Somebody is sending a message in the chat. Okay, sorry.
For the first one, I think there's a big gap between the first few words and last few words. There are a lot of things going on. It could have been said the meeting was postponed because of blah blah blah.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Thank you, Waqar.
Yeah, I have the same feelings for the first sentence. I think the verb is too far from the first word of the meeting.
Okay. Good,
it's not
good,
easy
good.
to understand.
Yeah. How many of you had to read this sentence twice to understand? Like all of you had to read twice. How many of you, let's say, understood this sentence after just reading the first time? That's an easier question. Okay, no. Abdullah, is that? And Hashim. Abdullah, you want to add on to that? Were you able to
I mean, yeah, I was able to understand it because I've seen a lot of sentences like this. Like when you put a comma and then you sort of put something that are like the reason or something, and then all of a sudden you continue. But it's not really convenient to read. But yeah, I got it.
Okay. Hashim, thank you, Abdullah.
Yeah, I was only answering your question whether I understand the sentence for the first time. But yeah, in general, yeah, I were able to.
Okay, so most readers would find it difficult to understand this such kind of sentences in the first go. It's because there is a lot of happening, as Waqar said, a lot of things happening in between the meeting and was postponed. But anyway, let's talk about sentence number 2. Anyone here wants to talk about sentence number 2?
Yeah, I think the second sentence is even more confusing than the first one. I don't know some and other. What's the exact meaning of the some and other?
Okay, so it's kind of confusing for Xiaolong. Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, I think like it could have been 2 sentences instead of 1, for example.
2 sentences instead of 1. Very interesting comment.
Because the main idea was a variety of measure, blah blah blah, were used, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So that's good. I think you guys managed to kind of understand what the problem is there, this is the idea of subject-verb agreement or subject-verb separation. So readers, as soon as they read a subject, they are looking for the verb. So as soon as you see a subject, your focus will be on finding the action. As readers, we like to see action, right? So as soon as we know, okay, the meeting, and in your brain, you're asking, what happened to the meeting? Okay, you're telling me it was postponed, blah, 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 right? But before you tell me it's postponed, you're telling me inconveniently scheduled, causing many commuters to get delayed. I'm looking for the verb. That's what you ask yourself. And the verb comes at the end. And what happens is that most readers will read what is in between as interruptive. They will not pay attention. So what will happen is if you mention something here that is important, your readers will not pay attention to it because they read it as interruptive, because your readers will be looking for the verb. Similarly here, a variety of measures. And now you want to know what happened to the variety of measures to quantify happiness. And then there is a pause, some more effective and accurate than others were used, okay? So these are just a couple of examples. So you identify the subject here, the meeting, verb was postponed, and you try to put them together, and that will help the readability of your text, okay? So just to highlight, readers expect the subject of a sentence to be followed by the verb. Anything that intervenes between subject and verb is read as interrupted. The subject and verb should be as close as together as possible in a sentence. And I've seen many times, because I'm reviewing papers and it comes across, what happens is sometimes I think writers will start to talk about something and they mention this thing about X, and then they realize, oh, if I go ahead and talk about X, there is something Y that my readers need to know before. So they put a comma and add, a few, let's say, words of a phrase about something Y, and now that they put another comma and then continue with their sentence. Now they think that they have told their readers everything they need to understand their sentence, but actually it will be read as interruptive and maybe they won't pay attention, and it's not the right way to do it, right? You might have to find a different way to construct your sentences. And that's one of the things why Hashim said it feels like there should be two sentences, because there are a couple of informations, right, in a single sentence. If the interruption is brief, it causes no problem. Oftentimes we do this, subject, however, verb, and we continue with the sentence. So that's not a problem most of the times. If it is slightly longer, also it's not likely to overburden us. Subject, and then we create an exception, like except on Tuesdays and verb. But if the interruption will really cause difficulty in understanding if it grows longer, like subject, except on Tuesdays, but not if it's raining, unless it will also rain on the previous Monday. So you tell a whole story between a subject and a verb, and your readers will be scratching their head. It's a good way to frustrate people. Put details between subject and verb, but don't do that. So this was the example, and this reads a lot better if you put subject and verb together. The meeting was postponed since it's inconvenient scheduling at 9 a.m. caused many commuters to become delayed and frustrated. Similarly here, a variety of measures were used to quantify happiness, some more effective and accurate than others. You could use a separate sentence to use that information, but this one looks much better than before. All right, so I want to conclude my, let's say, presentation by mentioning a few key points, and we can, let's say, spend some time on this and discuss this. So in professional writing, nobody cares about the writer, okay? The focus is only on readers. So now you guys are writing for your readers whose needs are not demonstration, but information. You need to inform them, okay? And you need to ask questions, not like, what should I do to get an A, or what should I do that my advisor will be happy? Not these kind of questions. The questions you should ask is try to understand first, who will be reading your paper? What is your intended audience, and what are their needs? What should I do? And one of the things I do is, it's hard to envision an audience. One of the things I do is when I'm writing papers, I tend to close my eyes and think about a conference room where I was presenting, and I think about the different faces. Nowadays we are doing it online, so hopefully many of you guys will be able to present in person soon, and you can have this personal experience. But I have this luxury to think about the days when we're presenting in person, and think about people who were in the rooms. I would think about a couple of different people and with different age groups, right? Somebody who's a new PhD student, somebody who's a very senior professor, somebody who is not from the field, but is trying to understand. So how should I write a paper that satisfies their needs and is not too, let's say, too basic for either one, or too, let's say, high level for one of these groups of readers. So that's very important. So when you're in the revision stage, read your paper as if one of these guys were reading and ask these questions, whether they would be able to understand. It will give you a lot of insight. And again, scientists write to inform readers, not to demonstrate. So make sure you remember this thing. And revision is the stage where transition is made from writing to understand to writing to be understood. And this is where, let's say, the magic happens. Your draft is not a version that is submittable or something that you should be expecting to be read by your audience. And we already saw meaning is conveyed only partly by word choice and word meaning, and mostly by the structural location of words, right? So structure is very important. Structure. Not only at the sentence level, but also at paragraph level, and also at the entire document level. So think about if you have written beautiful sentences that make sense and the structure is excellent, but their arrangement is not right. So the way they form a paragraph is not right. Your reader will still be confused because they will be jumping from one place to the other and not be able to make sense what you are saying. So structure is not only important at the sentence level, but at the paragraph level, and also at the document level, because you may have a beautiful paragraphs, but if you swap paragraphs, and you will see your readers will get confused, and they would be thinking, why am I reading about this thing now? Or, you know, it is referring to something that has not been said. So those kind of questions, right? So structure is important at every level. And in writing, if you want to know if you were successful or not, you need to ask this question: whether my reader has perceived what I wanted to communicate in the writing was good. If not, it wasn't. It's not about how beautiful your language is, how rich in vocabulary it is. The bottom line of what you are doing in science is being able to make sure your readers understand what you're doing, right? So if that happens, you are a successful writer. If that doesn't happen, whatever the reason is, you need to find a solution, right? And we haven't talked about paragraph level revision, but one thing that you could do is take a piece of paper, or take some paper that you've written and take a couple of paragraphs and underline a few words before every colon, semicolon, and period. This is the location where your readers will pay more attention. Are these locations occupied by the most important information in your paragraphs? If that's the case, good enough, right? Then your readers will be paying attention to those locations. But if not, then you need to work on your on restructuring of your paragraphs. So these are, let's say, called stress positions: colon, semicolon, and period. Comma is not a stress position because we use comma in English for many different reasons. A writing lexicon, I would like to remind you guys, helps us better understand and communicate about writing. So make sure after this session you go and try to read papers with the help of writing lexicon. Of course, in our course, what we do is we spend time taking this lexicon and reading papers and trying to find the lexicon terms in the paper and trying to learn how authors use these lexicon terms. And it helps you analyze writing better and talk about writing better. Because then you could say, okay, you will not say things like, this abstract I don't like, it's missing a lot of information, but you will say it is missing the most important part, which is the motive of this work, or the motive is too broad, it does not talk about the motive in the literature, and so on and so forth. Once you read the lexicon terms, you will be better able to understand this. A few more resources for you guys. So this article, The Science of Scientific Writing, it is a very detailed article on how you could use this revision stage and do different kind of improvements to your paper. So I would strongly encourage, I think every science student should read this paper. And this should be the first thing they should be reading about writing, or I don't know if you guys read about writing, but this should be the paper to read if there is one paper to read, The Science of Scientific Writing. And then this article, Me Write Pretty One Day, talks about, it helps me think about the different sections. Sometimes I'm confused about certain information. Where should this go? And at times I would like to read this couple of pages of article which talks about what should be contained in each section. It kind of helps me clarify those thoughts. If you want to go deeper into this, then this book, The Sense of a Structure from George Copen, who was really the person behind the reader-centered approach to scientific writing. And that's what you could read. I think that's all from my side. I would end by acknowledging the colleagues I had at Princeton Writing Program and friends and mentors there. I benefited a lot from interaction with them. So let me stop my presentation here, and I'll be happy to take questions now. All right, feel free to ask questions. You may have some general question. Don't worry whether it's related to this or partially related. Feel free to ask questions.
Yeah, thanks for your lecture. Actually, I have a question.
Sure, Xiaolong, please go ahead.
So if the subject is always closely followed by a verb, so it seems all our sentence will have the same structures. I just wondering in this case how to increase the diversity of the structure for our sentence.
Right. So it depends. So scientific writing is complex, Xiaolong. You might say that, you know, my sentence will have, let's say, subject followed by a verb. In most cases, this is the case. If you read papers, this is what happens, even because you would have never thought about this thing in the past, but this is what happens normally, and that makes writing good. But the diversity of the structure should not come from separating subject and verb, but it should come from other things, maybe your flexibility of writing and how you express your thoughts. Whereas subject and verb, as a rule, if there is, although I don't like to talk about rules in writing, but subject and verb should be as close as possible. You should not use subject-verb separation to have diversity of statements, or diversity of your sentences. And take a look at a few of the things that you have written or read before, and try to analyze them with this knowledge and see there may be a need where you have to do this, but most of the times we don't use it to have a diversity in our sentence structure.
Yeah, I see. Thanks for your clarification.
Thank you, Xiaolong.
Professor?
Yes, Waqar?
So the kind of research you are, and it's very close to what I do as well. We have to say someone's method or model is not good. But it's hard for me to say negative words about their model, because that's where I need to say what is good about my model. So
okay,
that's where I feel difficulty. Like if he said Fred is a bad guy, we want to say that model is bad model.
Okay,
but it's hard to.
It's hard, and why is it hard?
I want to say that model is bad, but I don't want to say I don't want to be very strong about that. Maybe that person could be the author itself of that model.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, I see your point with that. Let me ask one of you guys to chip in and see if there is some, let's say somebody here wants to talk about that. Anyone wants to answer Waqar's question, and then?
Yes, can I ask you, Professor? Thank you, firstly.
Almir, we're not talking about question. I guess you guys were not able to hear me.
Okay.
Waqar asked a question. I want you guys to. I want to see if you guys have any answer to Waqar's question first. I will come to your question, Almir.
Maybe I can try to answer.
Okay. So
for example,
yeah, go ahead.
For example, if we try to say that okay, that model is not so good, we can say that okay, this model is not really successful, for example, to detect something. Let's say we are looking for travel time, like in order to detect the travel time properly.
I see. Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you, Kanan. Good. Anyone else? Okay, so let me share my thoughts. So I think Waqar is asking this question because he is a young researcher, and he may have strong opinion about something, but he feels that, and oftentimes all of us come across this, that we have some strong opinions that something is bad, but we cannot say it so, let's say, strongly, because we feel our let's say, comment will not be acceptable in the scientific community. So you have to work with your advisor, Waqar, on this, and think about how you would want to convey this, whether you want to continue having this strong opinion, or you want to, let's say, reduce your tone and say it in a different way. And there may be examples that you could try to look at other papers where this is done, but this is not about scientific writing. I would say it's more about your, I would say it's about, let's say, the practicalities of publishing and stuff, right? Where people might not welcome your strong opinion, you being a young researcher, and maybe they would be okay with such strong opinion if you were an established researcher. That's my perception about it, but it does happen.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say.
Sure, go ahead, Xiaolong.
Yeah, maybe we can think about where this strong opinion will give us a really hard time from the reviewers.
Yeah, exactly. People think about that, of course, and maybe your paper will go to that same person for review, right? Ideally, you would want to continue with whatever opinion you have, but I mean, this is really not about writing. It's more about navigating the publication process or those kind of things, right? But yeah, I would say, Waqar, talk to your advisor. Your advisor should be better able to advise you. So Almir, you were asking a question?
Okay, thank you. I want to ask, is here any minimum to simplify a text? Because we have to save scientific style, I think. And do we have any limit to simplify our text?
Limit?
Yes, because sometimes you are reading some papers and you don't feel that this one scientific paper.
Good. Okay, good question, Almir. So the limit is you are the person who's going to set it depending on your perception of your audience. So maybe if you are writing to a paper that will be read by high school students, you would have to simplify things a lot. Maybe you're writing a paper in a very narrow journal where there are only, let's say, a few people and they understand everything that's going on. You would have a different way. You would not be broad enough, right? So it depends on the journal you are submitting largely and your perception of your audience, right? How you go about this process of how much of simplification I should do in the text, or how much should I accommodate a broad audience or a narrow audience or whatever, right? It depends on your audience, and that's the whole message here. And it's not easy. You have to do it multiple times, and you have to ask people around you, get feedback. Of course, your advisor plays an important role in this. And your co-authors, seek feedback from them, and that's what I would say. Anyone else?
Yeah, another quick question. Is a scientific writing program in the Princeton University publicly available, or it's only open for the?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so, Xiaolong. So I haven't. It was, of course, available for Princeton graduate students and undergraduate students, of course. But I don't think, I don't know about that. So I'm not affiliated with the Princeton writing program anymore. But I have continued to teach these courses at different institutes, and they invite me to teach, let's say, for a week or so, whenever I have a break or so. So that's what I do. But I would say you might have some resources at University of Houston that you might want to use. And if they are not talking about research or reader-centered approach to writing, maybe you could look at other resources on the Princeton Writing Program's website. There are a few other documents that you could read, and there are a few resources I had at the end of my talk. I will share you guys these slides. So I would say, you might have to do a little bit of work yourself and read those papers and be curious about your readers. And that is the best thing you could do.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, Abdullah?
Yeah, just a quick question. What do you think about the separation between the subject and verb by a definition of the subject?
Definitely. So you have to give me an example, like what?
All right, let's
is it coming from your paper?
Probably right. I wrote it somewhere because I do that a lot. So for example, let's take an example with FWI. FWI, comma, a popular technique to invert for velocity, and then comma, then has some limitation, for example.
Okay.
So you see what I mean? It's like the separation sort of by the definition of the.
Yeah. So there are different ways you could restructure the same sentence, but I would say the way you have said it, it's hard for me to really say it because say anything about it because this is, let's say, just an isolated sentence, but and it's not complete sentence as well, right? So I don't know what you want to say going forward and how complicated overall it is. But I want you to think not in terms of black and white, right? Whether there is subject-verb separation or no separation, right? Scientific writing is complex again, so don't use some rules really to dumb it down. It's very complex, and sometimes you have to do things and you have to create exceptions, and that's fine. But overall, it should serve the main purpose, which is your readers should be able to understand. And how are you going to do that is showing maybe your paragraphs or your sentences to different people, maybe your friends, your colleagues, who you think would be, let's say, representing your intended audience. So again, that is very important, Abdullah. And it's better, let's say, if you could restructure that in a different way where you don't have to do this, but it's not a no, I would say. Okay.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, but I think it depends on what you have been doing also in the past. So readers would, and this is very important. One thing I haven't discussed during the session is something about reader energy. So readers have finite energy. So when you pick a paper, of course, yourself, you're all busy, and we say, okay, we give ourselves some amount of time to read this paper. If it takes much longer than this, we are most likely to throw this paper away than to end up just keep reading, right? So if every paragraph after paragraph, it's a struggle to understand, unless it's your advisor's paper, I don't think you would continue reading that paper, right? Because we don't have, infinite energy or infinite time to read a paper. So when a reader starts reading a paper, and let's say they start to read a paragraph, and they have some amount of, let's say, estimate of mental energy needs. If it's taking longer, then they're going to get frustrated, right? So it also depends, Abdullah, what you've been doing before. Your reader may forgive you, they may be forgiving if you're doing it once in a while, and maybe that interruptive information is not important for them, then that's fine. It would not frustrate them, but it's a decision you have to make, right? So it's not, again, black and white. It's something you have to think about in the context of your entire document.
Right, thanks.
Anybody else? All right, I think we had a wonderful session. Thank you all for showing up. I hope you guys learned something new and benefited from the session. That was the purpose of doing this. And so that's great. Let me stop recording now.